Okay, so in this video, I am going to do some final finishing on this cutting board. So this is a blank that I've had sitting up on a shelf there somewhere for over a year because I've been busy doing other stuff. So what I need access to is my table saw, which you can see is covered in stuff. And I've got recycle, I've got empty boxes, but at least I can get to my planer, which is here. So I'm going to get that cleaned up first, and then we'll do the final finishing on this cutting board and how I do it. Okay, now that I have access to my table saw, it only took me 2 seconds, really, it did. So what I need to do is straighten up these edges, which I need to basically take a little bit off each side, get a flat edge on both sides, and then I'm going to be running it through the planer. But because of the staggeredness of this cutting board, so if you can see, this one I do lots of different angles in it. So process to get here, it takes a while because I've basically re-glued this about 4 times to make this cutting board. And the edge is not straight. It's as straight as I could get it. Gluing it up and running it through the table saw is very tricky because you don't want to have any kind of wobble on it. So what I'm going to do is use a straight edge, anything you have really, and I'm going to pick a side where there's the most amount of contact. This one is okay, I've got contact here and here. I could take a hand planer and plane down the high spots and try and make it a little bit better by hand. This side I've got contact, probably 5 or 6 places actually, it's pretty straight. So what I'm going to do is keep this on the side. I'll use some tuck tape. I'm going to wrap it around and stick it to the top. Then I'll use this as the flat edge to go against the fence to trim off this side. Once I get this side trimmed enough where I can take this off, then I'll flip it around, put this against the fence where it's flat, retrim this side, and we'll go back and forth. So I'm going to do that. The other thing I'm going to do is put a new blade in my saw. So this is one I had resharpened a little while ago. I've got the, they dip it in wax. So I'm going to take the other blade off, stick this one on, make sure it's aligned as straight as I can get it, and I'm going to use a new blade. I haven't changed it in a while, and it'll cut so much better. So I'm just going to add in a few steps on how I put in a new blade. So I took the wax off. What you want to do is make sure that it's nice and clean here. Even a little bit of dust will cause it to be out of whack. Actually, a little something on there. Looks like a piece of tape or something. All right, so that's as clean as I'm going to get it. That goes here. This also makes sure it's clean. It does make a difference. And we'll tighten this up. And I guess I should put some feet down so this doesn't move. There. Not going to move. So what I've got here is basically just a gauge, a micro gauge on a magnet. So what I'm going to do, loosen this up. And I'm going to line this up near the top as close to the edge as I can get it. And okay, so I guess it's hard to see with the camera. So all this is a micro gauge, it's 10,000ths of an inch. And what I'm going to do is line it up near the top of the blade, just so it's got a little bit of pressure in there. Lock this down so it's not moving. And I'm going to rotate the blade and watch how much that changes. So if I have any wobble in the blade, and kind of go through full rotations a couple times. So I've got play, looks like it's about 6,000ths of an inch is the play that I've got. So what I'll do is I'll lock it, loosen it off, do quarter turn. Retighten it down, check again. So now I've got, it's worse, I made it worse. Now I'm about 12 thousandths of an inch play, so loosen it, change it again. Quarter turn. I'll do this about 4 or 5 times until I get to a spot where it's got the least amount of play. For this, again, I was going to tape it on this side, so I've used masking tape before. I find the tuck tape is quite a bit stickier. And I'm sure someone is going to complain or say that this is super unsafe. But if you have a good saw, you have a good fence that you know is square and straight, and this is tight up against something and you don't have any movement, I don't really see an issue with it. But if you're not comfortable doing it, don't do it this way. There's other ways you can flatten an edge, make other jigs. This is what I do. Works for me. Alright, so that is on there. That's not coming off. It's a little loose this way, but it's going to be tight anyway. So make sure that's smooth. And we'll run it through like that. So what I want to do is I only want to take off a little bit at a time. So I'm going to take off just a hair. Raise this blade up. And yes, I'm going to cut the whole thing at once with a sharp blade. With walnut and hardwood, it actually cuts quite nice. Alright, got my fence set where I want to cut it. Dust collector line's hooked up, so let's give it a go. Okay, so I've got a flat edge there. It's not perfect yet. I'm going to do another pass on that side, but I'm going to do it with this off. Okay, so now that I've got this side flat, I can use this up against the fence to get this side flat. Then I'll turn it around again to do this, the final pass on that side. So So here I can take off more at a time. First I need to figure out where's the best side to do it on. That seems odd. Or do I want to pass it through this way? Yeah, either one matter. It's a little wobbly, but I'm going to hold it down this way. All right. So, because I want to keep the cutting board as wide as possible, I'm going to just take off enough to get rid of all the jagged edges and just get it flat. So, right there is actually 12 inches. All right, let's see how it goes. And I think we're good. There we go. Now we got 2 flat edges on the sides. All right, so when I'm running this through, I'm not watching the blade. I am watching the fence. I know my hands are far enough away. I'm holding this down tight and against the fence. I'm watching to make sure that this stays tight along the fence the whole time. Because if I take my eyes off that and it shifts away from the fence, I'm not going to see it. It's going to catch the blade, to get kicked back, all kinds of stuff. So your fence is where you're watching. You know the blade's going to cut. You don't need to watch it. You know that your fence is straight to your blade. You just watch it. You're running along the fence. You've got a feel for it. You'll know if it's binding. It'll be harder to push through. But doing a little bit at a time, especially at this point or at this stage of the cutting board, it ain't moving. There's no pressure in it. Like I say, this cutting board has been sitting on my shelf for over a year, and it's still like I put it there a year ago. So I'm always watching the fence here, watching for gaps. I don't want any kind of shifting away from the fence, and it's been perfectly fine. So what I'm going to do next is I'll get the planer ready for this to go through. And what we want to look at is if there's any wobble in the board itself, and I think there is a little bit. So we want to try and take that out and figure out which side we want down first. So we're check corners. We've got a little bit play that way, none this way. I'm gonna flip it over. Nothing there. Actually, there's nothing that way either. Nothing there. Tiny bit here. So we're going to make sure that this is the top running through first. So I'm going to mark top and then the direction. So like in one of my other videos about running the cutting boards through your planer, you want to make sure the back edge is chamfered. So, all right, I'm ready to run this through the planer now. So this is a 12.5 inch wide planer. The final dimension on this board was just a hair under 12 inches, so it's going to fit just nicely. And I've got another video on running cutting boards through the planer. I do have the Helix spiral head in here. I've seen some comments of some other guys that are running that successfully ran them through as well on just the plain 3 blades that would be the factory blade on this planer. So again, you're going to do super light passes, like a 1/16 of an inch at the most. What I did was I took my sander at a 45, sanded off the back edge, so I've got a small chamfer on it. Just a 45. Let's see if it'll show up. You can probably see that in the camera. Where I've got the 45 on both sides because you're going to end up flipping it over. So if you're finally running this through, I marked the top before so that there's less wobble on it. We'll get the top plain nice and flat, then we'll flip it over and do the other side. So when you get close to the edge and you're going down enough and this chamfer goes away, just take your sander out or planer and just sand it off some more. So again, when I'm running through, I'm going to be going down like this much at a time or less, like just a hair, just a hair, just a hair, just a hair for every pass. It's going to take a while, but it's a lot easier than trying to do this by hand, like way easier. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to raise this back up, make sure it's not touching at first, I'll just slowly run this through. So I'm not going to show that. Got a separate video on that, so I'll show you. Okay, now I'm ready to do some sanding on it before I do the chamfer on the edges. So you can see this is actually after running through the planer, and you can see some of the lines are this way just because of the blade that I have in there. It's not the 3-blade, it's the Shelix one, so it's got a whole bunch of little blades. And getting both sides to this finish took about half an hour on the planer. So you're saving hours and hours of manual work or sanding. And it came out really good actually. So all I'm gonna do for sanding is basically just get the tool marks off. And I usually start with a 60 grit and then I just go straight to a 220. Even a 120 will work, 150 doesn't matter. I'm gonna be using this 6-inch sander. This is actually one of the newer ones I got. I got it just so I wanted something a little bit heavier and smoother. Okay, so I've got this sanded. I've got 220 grit on top, bottom with the big 6-inch sander. And I did all the edges as well with the 220 with the smaller sander. And what I'm gonna do now is I put a 45 on all the edges. I do 45 top, bottom, as well as the corners. And I'm just gonna use, small trim router. Got a 45 degree bit on there with, guide bearing. I'm not even sure the brand. It works. So I'm gonna go around all that. Okay, so I've got the 45s on all the edges, top, bottom, corners. There's still a bit of a sharp edge. We're gonna go over that by hand after. But a very critical step on doing an end grain cutting board is actually wetting it. So what you want to do is, right now it's smooth because it's a 220 grit is what I use on it. It's very smooth, but in a wet situation, what's going to happen is even if you oil it, using it in the kitchen, whatever, the grain's going to pull up as soon as this gets wet the first time. So we're going to use some water and do that first. So all we're going to do is just basically soak it. Until it's, it's all wet. What I should do is actually just get a cloth and just wipe it down, but it won't matter. Get all the edges wet and then leave this dry. And then flip it over, do the same thing. What I'm gonna do is just keep it on edge and just wet the other side like this. Make sure I get all my 45s as well. And I'm gonna leave this dry. So depending on where you are, that's actually what it's gonna look like. It's gonna darken right up when we put the oil on it. So we'll leave that till it's completely dry. Then we're gonna come back and do 220 grit again around the whole thing. The sides and edges here we're gonna do by hand with the 220 just to round off the sharper edges of the 45 just so it's nice and smooth. Okay, we are about 95% done, so I've resanded this after I wet it to 220 grit, and then I did all the edges by hand with 220. I went with the grain on the sides as well. I put my brand on it over here, and now we're gonna oil it, so it's pretty much done. It's a little dusty, doesn't matter. We're gonna be wiping it down anyway, so all I'm using is just regular mineral oil, like any drugstore. It's food grade. It's sold as a laxative actually, and it's like $5 for this. Easy to get for anybody for maintenance. And all I'm gonna do is just pour it on. Spread it out. I'm putting it on fairly thick. Let it soak in. I'm going to get all the edges. Okay, so I've got the cutting board is done. It's sat overnight. just to, I just wiped off the sweat. This is actually the bottom side. Just make sure if you've put a label or something on it that you have the right direction. And yeah, so this is the bottom. This is where I'm going to put the feet. What I'm doing is just measuring in from the corner. I do about 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches. It kind of depends. I'm just going to sort of make a mark approximately where it's going to go from both sides. Alright, so that's marked. I've done the other corners already. And I use these for feet. So I just pick these up at Home Depot or Lowe's, or probably get some online on Amazon. It's just a anti-skid rubber pad is all it is, really, with a screw hole. And the screws that come with this are useless. Don't use them. I don't know how many of these I've broken, put into cutting boards. I don't use them anymore, but I do use the feet. I go with stainless steel. I've got a number 6. It's a 1/2 inch stainless steel screw because the cutting boards are going to get wet, so you want stainless steel. And what I do is I had a small drill bit, and I'm going to just drill the hole. And I don't have this screwdriver. I should grab that. There, and all I'm doing is lining that up and screwing this in. There, so I'm going to do that at all 4 corners, flip it over, check for any kind of wobble. I already checked the board is already flat, but what happens if you do have a wobble? So the nice thing about these feet is you can just sand them down. So if you have a slight wobble or it's a years down the road, somehow the board warped, figure out what your high point is and just sand down the high corner until it's good, because you're not using that side anyways. So it doesn't really matter. All right, so that is it. There's no wobble in that. And with those rubber feet on there, on a wet countertop, even if it's like a granite countertop, it's not going to slide around on you. And it's enough lift, and with the 45-degree corners, it's easy to pick up the board. I don't need to put handles in the sides or anything. And that's it, cutting board's done.